This time Albright with AVNetwork with an AVNetwork Tech Talk. Talking with Stephan Villet. Stephan is from Smart Monkeys. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, team. Welcome.
So let me start by saying this. You know, when we talk a lot about the move from AV into the cloud, into the network, onto the network, you know, the AV IT convergence has been talked about incredibly the last 20 years. That speed has really increased, I would say, the last 3 or 4 years. Smart Monkeys, and you guys talk about the virtualization of hardware. So before we get in kind of the program itself and Isaac, and we'll explain what Isaac is in a second, what do you guys mean when you say the virtualization of hardware?
So basically, I mean, as you were saying, you know, for the longest time, we've been hearing about IT and AV merging kind of thing. And we tend to look at it as ITification of the AV industry. Mainly what happened is that in terms of infrastructure, our technology, the equipment that we use every day are now relying more and more onto networks. So, you know, we don't have those dedicated type of pipeline for audio or video. Now we're just using IT network. Now that said, there is also another part of this that has very much evolved is the use of software rather than just having very specific units. So nowadays you have a lot of product, even though they might look like they are very specific and proprietary hardware, in the end, mainly based on their component, they're just computers running an operating system and then a software that is dedicated to the application. So at Smart Monkeys, basically, we've been looking back at this for a while, and we've been looking at what's done in the IT world to actually host software and to deploy software and to use and maintain software and see how we can use it into the AV paradox. And the thing is, we realized that basically we are in need of the same things in terms of maintainability and operation. And so virtualization is one of those things that have been used for decades into the IT and that we're looking at as something that we should be using much more into the AV. And before I dive a bit about what is virtualization, is that we've been using virtualization as part of our design and project for a long time. And we actually went into creating a product that is called Isaac, and that is basically bringing virtualization to our industry.
So talk first about what Isaac is, what it does real quickly, and then we'll talk about, you know, kind of who most benefits from it.
Right, absolutely. And talking about this, I will actually answer your question about virtualization. Sorry about this. So
that's all right.
Isaac is really a productization of our design. So we've been working with that type of technology, again, the virtualization, we'll talk about it, promise. But also, you know, we're mainly a control company, so we're creating interface for people to be able to operate their environments and not have to interact so much with different technology themselves. And basically, we've realized that many of the installation are actually have a big need for the same thing over and over again. So Isaac basically is kind of relying on virtualization for the platform, and then we bring a set of feature that is something recurring for all the application. So that's the time where we need to talk about virtualization. The goal about virtualization is basically to abstract hardware. So we have all those different entities, audio, video, lighting, control, media, and in many instances, we're talking again about software running onto computers. So with virtualization, we're getting rid of the hardware itself, and we compact all those applications into virtual instances, and we run them into a hardware platform which is meant for it. And those are basically servers that we use in data center to host lots of different things. So one thing that happens first is that we are achieving hardware consolidation. So that means in one unit, we can have multiple virtual instances running at the same time. We don't need anymore one computer for this, one computer for that, and so on and so on. We're also using the same pool of resources. That means as an aggregate, we can have infrastructure, so servers that are extremely reliable, that provides redundancy at all levels, and that every single application is actually benefiting from this. There's another aspect of virtualization, is the fact that you can then create cluster of those hardware pool, and then you achieve hardware redundancy. Now, obviously, you can have redundancy by having a primary and a secondary, but usually in our in our industry, when you do so, you need to have 2 licenses of those software, and you need to have some sort of a scripted failover for that kind of things. In a virtual environment, there is no need for any of this. There is just one instance, and all the reliability and the redundancy is done by itself. And finally, because of the nature of the technology, it's fully scalable. So you can use it for simple application like a lobby somewhere, and you can deploy it into a huge campus or theme park or that kind of things. Everything is then managed at the software level, so you can reboot those machines, you can do all those kind of things remotely without having a need for physical technician on site, which is something that is quite useful nowadays. So a simple unit like this can host 4, 5, or 6 of what we used to look at as separate systems. That's
so talk for a second, because you mentioned different entities. What you have is you have different partners that you can virtualize the software that a typical AV integrator would install, right? And
correct. So for instance, you would have a control platform like Crestron, and you would have it as a controller itself or running in a computer, and then you may have a Dante management platform that you would run on another computer, and then you may have a need for a database for an ID scanning system, for instance. All those kind of things. Those are basically computers. So in advance in the design, you have to think about all this, having room for it, having cables for it, ports on your network and everything. Here, basically, you put everything into one box. You don't have to multiply the number of cables. You minimize your footprint. You minimize the impact that you have on the needs for HVAC and power and those kind of things. But otherwise, in an operational standpoint, there is no difference between that and how we do things normally.
I would push back a small part about that. The fact that you're able to create redundancy is slightly different, and so understand from a former tech manager, and we'll get to that in a second. I'm looking at this going, I can now double up and have 2 Crestron processors, or 2 processors, right? 2 control processors within a span of 1 or 2 rack units, and 2 processors for audio, and 2 processors for Dante. And so if one goes down, suddenly there's another one there. That right there creates a level of security that tech managers right now don't have.
Right, and that's actually much better than this, because you don't need to have 2 Crestron.
Yeah.
You just need to have 1. But it's a big difference, because if you take, we work a lot on the entertainment side of things. So we work a lot for theme parks and everything. We're using Media Launch Manager a lot. Media Launch Manager is a software for show control. Now, if you're in a standard environment, you're going to have 2 machines, and you're going to have 2 Media Launch Manager software, and you have to buy 2 licenses. As part of a virtualization cluster, you don't have to have 2 of those, just 1, and they're part of their private on-premise cloud, if you will. And so hardware redundancy is taken care of at the virtualization layer. You don't even need to buy 2 licenses of those. So not only do you achieve greater redundancy, you also minimize the impact of being redundant in regards to capital investment.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. All right, so as I mentioned the fact that I'm an old tech manager, so I want to take it from that angle. Talk for a second about how the in-house integrator, the tech manager, the IT manager can really leverage Isaac.
So when it comes to AV managers, users, owners, obviously they benefit from the things that we've talked about right now. But Isaac in itself is much more than just a platform. So there is also a software suite on top of this, because the idea for us is to have one platform for hosting, but also having one place to go to operate, maintain, supervise, making sure everything is working fine. So just from a simple web browser, you can connect to Isaac, and then you instantly get access to a lot of different features. And I was mentioning the fact that during our project, we were thinking about lots of features that we keep on bringing back to the table at different scales, but always in some way. Access management is a big thing. You want to be able to give access to your users at different levels. So you want to have the ability to set up access right for the entire system that is behind Isaac, inside Isaac, behind Isaac. The next thing is we want Isaac to be able to give you access without going anywhere to all the machines that you're using in your system. So obviously we've been talking about the one that we host, but you might still want to have some of the machines outside of Isaac. And in that case, you want to be able to connect to them. So we've included what we call Isaac Connect, which is basically a remote technology relying on a remote desktop, VNC, and others. So right inside Isaac, inside your web browser, you can get access to your machine just like on this screenshot where you're accessing a Windows machine, and you can interact with the Windows machine within the HTML environment of your web browser. So it brings two things here. You don't need to have any specific software to do that. And second, it's all going through the Isaac credential process. So only if you've been given access, granted access to this machine, will you be able to do so. And you never have to know about the IP address or the credential of the session to do so. Panels in general are what we're looking at to get greater access to this. So we can also have access to a simple web page. And that's very important because many of the devices that you have in a system already have a web page to do some settings and everything. Again, you won't need to remember the IP address, and you will be able to protect that from people that you don't want to have access. We can also have panels with documentation, and we have panels for different modules that our partners are bringing to the table, and we'll talk about this. Since we have access to all of this, we have logs to get a sense of what has been happening in the system. Since we have log, we also have the ability to create alerts, notification, visual notification inside the interface, but also sending emails. We have a in-depth system monitoring, so you can manage connections. You can see if you've lost a connection network with some of the device 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, 10 hours ago, two days ago. So it's a very powerful tool to get an insight on the historical behavior of your system and for troubleshooting. We have content management, so you can ingest content and do whatever you need to do with that kind of things. We have a scheduling mechanism if you want to know how do you start operation into your space or do other things, announcements. I mean, limitless suite of feature. We also have a documentation, so you don't even need to go somewhere else to get user manual and SOPs and other things like this. So the idea is really to have one place, one portal where you can fully administer your system. I think that's the value for the owner and the tech manager.
Talk for a second then about, move this on then up the chain to the dealers, the folks that are actually putting this stuff in. How do integrators kind of, leverage this ability and leverage this capability? And also, how do they communicate to an owner that's never heard of Isaac,
right,
really some of those capabilities?
So I think there are several angles to this. So obviously, as an integrator, you will benefit from everything that we've talked about on the design standpoint, for instance, because when you're designing with Isaac, you are mostly concentrating on the resource of a pool of resources that you will be using in the future. So let's say after the design is done, during production, during integration, you realize that, we needed a file repository, or we needed to have another computer for some reason. Well, you may not have a need to actually find some physical space, making sure you have enough ports on your network, bring power and everything. You might just be able to create, just like that, magically, a new virtual machine inside Isaac, and it will connect to the network. So that's one thing that is interesting. The other one also is that we're bringing more and more tools for integrators to be able to support long-term and during the production their users. So what we're working on for the next release that would be here by Infocom in June is the implementation of monitoring switches. So you will be able to see in real time the status of any of your switches. You'll be able to see what happened, in the past, so you can troubleshoot efficiently. And we're bringing also automation of Windows computer management. So you'll be able to deploy and make sure all your computers are working fine. We've used this for a project here for art gallery where we had to manage 2,000 of computers. And basically, instead of going from one to the other and doing everything we had to do, we scripted everything and sent, and, started the sequence, and everything was done automatically. One last thing, obviously, that is very important for the integrators is to be able to relate Isaac to other part of the system. So we have partners here, and I think the partners are bringing two very big value item. The first one, obviously, is the integration. So if you have Crestron here, QC's there, then you know that Isaac will work with them very easily. That's not to say that Isaac cannot work with anything else, but the integration is already here for those partners. The other thing, obviously, is that looking at the brand, it brings legitimacy to our product. It shows that those very big player in our industry are firm believer into the direction that we're taking with virtualization. Oh, and by the way, one last thing is that it's easy for an integrator or reseller to show what is the interface of Isaac and to show what will be the workflow to operate the space that the end user will be inherited as part of the delivery of the system. And that's a big thing, because many times when we talk about building interfaces, it's usually about sketching some stuff and saying, well, we're going to be building something that will resemble this so you can operate efficiently. Here you can see it before you buy it.
And that's pretty cool. And talk for a second about some of those partners you've got. You mentioned the fact that most of this will be ready by Infocom. When you leverage, the integrator's relationship with, some of those 3 or 4 folks that you've got there, how are we marrying those relationships between, Smart Monkeys, Isaac, the platform, as well as, some of these high level AV dealers or AV manufacturers.
Right. So, clarification: all those vendors are supported right away with 2.0, which just happened to get out. We're working with many more, which is very interesting. There are a couple of different levels of integration, but it's interesting if you look at Omnis, for instance. Omnis is a product by Megapixel VR. It's a monitoring system for LED walls. And Omnis is actually a hardware product. It's a 1U unit that monitors all of this. And when we talked about integration with Isaac, obviously the first step was, maybe we can make sure that both are working together. But since they realized that Isaac is a hosting platform, they actually created a full virtual appliance replica of their units, so that one can live into Isaac. Actually, it ships with Isaac because it's part of the overall system. So it's to show how far some of those manufacturers are willing to go to really step into the world of virtualization, which is, I think, the future.
Well, actually, let's get one of my last questions then. Where do you see the future of kind of virtualization design? Because what you're talking about is a fundamental shift in AV design. So instead of having 3, 4, 5 black boxes, right, in a rack, designers could, engineers could look at a system and go, oh, you know what, we could just put one of these virtualization boxes, one of these Isaacs,
right,
or 2 if we're looking to kind of really, create a robust system with redundancy and this, that, and the other. What do you see the future?
I think there is no way around the fact that AV is going to be IT. So, sure, when you talk with a lot of folks in our industry, lots of them are like, wait. The IT guys, they know their stuff, but we know ours. And that's true, and that's not going to change. That's not the point. AV will always need to have the AV expertise that only our industry can bring. But in terms of technology, I think we're going to go past IT infrastructure for AV industry, which is what we have right now. There are much more from the IT world that can bring us to a point where we can almost abstract the physical part of the AV. So in the past, we've been from analog audio to digital audio, Kubernetes, then Dante, and so on and so on. And it took some time. And we're doing the same with audio and video right now. When we look at virtualization, it's actually interesting to see that it happened before. And nobody really realized that. But if you think about audio in itself, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when you wanted to design an audio system, you would have to pick a preamp and EQ and routing and all those kind of things physically, and you would have to put them into a rack and interconnect them. And then if you needed more output or more of this or more of that, you would have to add boxes and interconnection.
Yeah.
But nowadays we're using DSP. And what is a DSP if not just virtualization of those elements? We now have one box, and you're creating you're creating a file where you're literally taking a plugin. Oh, I'm going to take a preamp, I'm going to take an EQ, a router, I'm going to connect them into my file. And what we do is basically using those virtual items to create a system. So we're doing this with audio DSP right now, every day. So I don't see why we should be scared or worried of how to do this in a bigger picture with everything that we have. It's working. It's just a matter of transitioning, and I think that's going to happen.
So not only is the virtualization the future, it's the present is kind of what you're saying.
It is, because virtualization is massively used in every other industry, financial, hospitality, and everywhere.
All right, very good. Last question, Stephan. If somebody wants to connect with you or get a hold of Smart Monkeys and find out more about Isaac, how do they do that?
I think the simplest is just to go to our website. And I think people can benefit in two ways here. They can benefit for the product itself, because it's a way for them to implement that type of technology. And if they need to, Smart Monkeys can help getting them transitioning to that. Because remember, we basically transitioned in our project before we actually created a product. The product is really just a result of the fact that we felt it was the right way to go, and our partner had a hard time to grasp the idea of not having a out of the shelf product to do that on their own.
All right, very good. Stephan Villet from Smart Monkeys. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim.
All right, for us, for AV Network, go by our website, avnetwork.com. That's avnetwork.com. Find more tech tales like this. All that and more at avnetwork.com. avnetwork.com.